Welcome to Wagons West, Thursday, April 18th. Once again, Facebook has given us problems, so it should be up there now. But if you're having issues on Facebook, you can join us on all the other wonderful platforms, Rumble X, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So welcome. Excited for tonight's guest. We're going to be talking about some interesting things, taking off our cowboy hats, putting on the tinfoil hat. And tonight we have a Wagons West veteran, Mr. Donny Spellbreaker. He was on the first episode of Wagons West, which you cannot find on YouTube because we said naughty things, and we may say naughty things tonight. So if you are watching on YouTube, you're going to want to go over to Rumble probably right now, or X, whatever your platform is, because as we get into the more spicy topics, we're just going to take ourselves off YouTube and save my channel the problem of a second strike because we already have one of those. So without further ado, Mr. Donny Spellbreaker, a man who needs no introduction, but we'll give him one anyways out of respect. Donny, yeah, that's your line. I love it. I love your podcast. I love your intro music. It's like the best podcast intro I hear. And I listen. Yeah. So Donny I'll let him kind of talk about his podcast a bit, but I heard about you at first from a kind of a Twitter group message where one of the people in there, I think it was Dr. Virginia Johnson, said, "Hey, this guy's one of my favorites. Check him out." So I checked you out. I really like what you had to say. We connected a little bit through messaging, found out that we basically are clones of each other in that we went to the same high school in small town Ontario, had the same doctor, kind of did all the same things. And then you actually moved out to Alberta, much like I did. So I was very interested to talk about that. And that was actually, Donny, you have the honor of being what this podcast is named after. Wagons West was Ontarians that packed up and moved west. And I just decided to keep the name because our episode was actually going to be a one-off. I wasn't actually going to do a podcast, but then we picked it up and here we are today. So thank you, sir, for the namesake. And thank you for coming on today. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, man. Absolute pleasure to be back. I love to see I have to say, a superior production quality to my own podcast. A lesser man would be jealous of such refinement. But yeah, man, I really do appreciate you having me back on.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. I've been listening to your podcast regularly. When I take my dog for a walk, which is about an hour every day, probably when I'm indisposed in the washroom, I have podcasts on. That's kind of the only time I do listening or watching of YouTubes or whatever. And so I catch about an hour a day of you and everyone else. I listen to a bunch of other podcasts, but you have so many interesting guests that I've not heard of, guests that I find fascinating and really intelligent, a lot smarter than I am, which is who I like to interview because I like to learn things and try to stuff it into this brain. And holding on to the information can sometimes be a problem, but I love hearing it and love your guests. You do a great job of a podcast. You can talk trash about your own production value all you want, but the quality of your content is A1. And so I recommend everybody go over, check out the Spellbreakers podcast on Spotify, on Rumble, and all the other places that he has it. Donny, can you tell us a little bit about your podcast?
Yeah, man. To say, yeah, so we're called the Spellbreakers podcast. As you said, we're on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute, Spotify, and a few others as well. And yeah, I first categorize it kind of as almost like post-truther podcast. So, for those of us who are aware of a lot of the evils and corruption going on in the world, but realizing that just talking about it endlessly and complaining about evil psychopaths is not really a solution. And so that's what I call the post-truther movement, which I'm trying to coin and to create. But yeah, my podcast is unique in that it really is a blend of people. I interview alien abductees and Gnostics and Catholics, and I just had James Corbett on, who's like, I think the OG of kind of conspiracy research. It's just kind of interviewing people that I find interesting, with more now, it's more of a tinge of like spirituality, consciousness, and reality and such. So yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag, I guess, but yeah, it's funny in my Telegram group, we got Catholics arguing with Christians, arguing with agnostics and pagans, and they all seem to be getting along. So it seems like creating a good vibe of fellow spellbreakers who are, questioning things and seem to be getting along, man. Yeah.
So that's awesome. Yeah, again, everybody, go check out his podcast, subscribe, make sure you don't want to miss that. I will say for a guest right now, two things to keep in mind. Both of us are in rural Alberta, which means it's a miracle if the internet works on any given day. Plus, you've had the experience in many of your episodes of, we'll call it technological attacks. So as we get into the conspiracies, I'll say this, my wife and I love watching like ghost hunting shows. There's one called Project Fear we really like. And they use, when they go and talk to the spirits, they have like all these electronic devices. One's called the spirit box, where it just plays this really loud frequency and like little voices come through. They have this thing called an ovulus, which has like a dictionary of words in there. And like the spirit or whatever will make the words say the words or whatever to respond to their questions. And spirits should be able to like manipulate frequencies and stuff. Their flashlight batteries die when they go into certain haunted spots. So all I'm saying is if our signal goes down tonight, it's definitely the devil or it's rural Alberta service. We just don't really know which one.
Dude, I got a story about that actually.
Yeah, do it up.
These ghost hunters, right? So it's Toronto, and yeah, my lady at the time, she was like, "Oh, there's this ghost tour going around like High Park area in Toronto. These guys are ghost hunters. This is what they did for a living, right? They hunted ghosts." And there's all these sightings, in old buildings. So it was like, the Devil's Night, the night before Halloween. And she bought us tickets to go on this ghost hunting tour. And then we meet up at this old mansion. And these guys are just like pieces of garbage, these ghost hunters. They're like trying to convince this like 10-year-old girl, like to the people who own the house, who are hosting. They went into the daughter's room and they had one of those like scanning channels, and they're trying to convince this 10-year-old that she's got like a poltergeist in her house. So you can tell they were just like scammers. They're trying to get people to like hire them, for services. And so I started fucking with everybody on the tour. so I started grabbing rocks, right? And we're walking in High Park at night, and all of a sudden they stop to give a thing, and I whip this rock backwards. And it smacks a window of this old farmhouse they were showing. And everybody losed it, started screaming, like running away. So yeah, even the ghost hunter guy like freaked out. He's like, "Oh my god!" So I had the left.
There's the Ottawa Hostel in Ottawa, Ontario. It was a former jail that's now converted into a hostel, and there's a haunted cell there from the cell of Patrick Whelan. Patrick Whelan was the last public hanging in all of Canada. So that's some fascinating Canadian trivia history. And so apparently you can encounter the ghost of Patrick Whelan. Now, Patrick Whelan, he was, like I said, he was a public hanging. And the crime was, on circumstantial evidence, the assassination of Darcy McGee, who was a father of Confederation in Canada. And it was actually, so far, knock on wood, it was the only assassination of a political figure in Canadian history thus far in Canada. So let's try and keep it that way. But yeah, so long story short, through marriage, that Patrick Whelan is like a long kind of descendant of mine. So I thought I'll go connect with a murderous ancestor ghost, but I've never actually went to the Ottawa Hostel yet. But guys, if you want to go to the Ottawa Hostel, bring your scanner, ovulus, and you'll get to hear the story of how he, apparently the way they found him, which is like, this is like murder 101. It's like, don't leave evidence. And it was like they followed basically tracks in the snow back to like where he was. So, I mean, not very sophisticated means, but, I guess he was passionate anyway.
Dude, yeah, committing crimes in the winter. A lot of these warmer climate people don't realize, like, but you just follow the guy back every time.
Okay, so for YouTube peoples, we're going to take this stream off YouTube now. I'm here just to be a face in front of you for a second to get you over to rumble.com/tjkennedyphoto or x.com tjkennedyphoto, whichever you prefer. And we'll just take a second. I'll shut down the YouTube stream and you guys can come on over there and join us for all the fun and conversation. So let me just...